Actually, I'm trying to make sure you see my screen. Uh, is that showing up now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me briefly introduce the three speakers today. We're going to start with Christine McCullum-Gomez, who is a dietitian who has long been interested in intersections between food systems, and soil and ecological health. I'm going to serve as a second speaker, and I've already introduced myself. And then we're going to go to our third speaker, Bill Wenzel, who has long been working nationally around food and farm policy and is the Agriculture Policy Director at the Izaak Walton League. We hope to have about half an hour presentations, a little bit longer, with a pretty robust question and answer period. Don't wait to submit questions. If you look in the menu on your screen, there's a question function down towards the bottom. You can input your questions anytime during the presentations, and we will be tracking them. And then I will moderate during the Q&A period and be able to sort through your questions and get to as many of them as possible. So again, the earlier the better for submitting your questions. Whoop, sorry. So what I want to do just as a prelude before we hear from Christine is just to talk a little bit about how to think about connecting what happens on farms with health. And I think as background, it's useful to talk about what many are calling two of the crises of the century, namely obesity, which many of you know uh, is hugely expensive, costing just in direct costs about an additional $170 billion a year. Um, Somewhere between a third and two-thirds of the population is overweight or obese. Somewhat smaller number of children, but still, as a harbinger of the future, the level of obesity in children is maybe even more concerning. The second big epidemic confronting us is an epidemic of antibiotic resistance and antibiotic resistant infections. And this too is quite expensive, costing about 26 billion in extra costs of treatment for these infections, of which there are about 2 million in the US each year alone, accounting for at least 23,000 deaths, many of those from MRSA. And these are lowball estimates. So if we had good tracking of these resistant infections, the final numbers would be much higher. So what we do know already is that farm production matters to health. And it's worth stating, even though it's probably obvious to many in our audience, but even the study from a few years ago, the infamous Stanford study, which was widely misreported, looked at 200 existing studies and found that consumption, for example, of organic foods may reduce exposure to pesticide residues and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And that's just one meta-analysis out of many showing these links between farm production and health. What I want to talk about, though, and frame up for our speakers is focusing on the bacterial ecosystem that connects what happens in the farms with what happens in people. And one way to think about this is by comparing the gut with a gram of soil. So bacteria obviously are teeny, and so there's a lot of them in a small space. So in a gram of soil, uh, there can vary from 100 million to 3 billion bacteria. In the human body, there's trillions of bacteria, 100 trillion in the gut alone. And if you take all these combined, they amount to about 3 pounds of bacteria in the average person's body. And what's new is really thinking about these bacteria, both in the human body, but also in the general environment as an ecosystem unto itself. And And the microbiologists actually talk about humans as being part of the bacterial ecosystem and not the other way around. So we're going to hear next from Christine McCullum-Gomez, and we're going to hear her talk about resilience. But I wanted to end with a quote from Mark Hyman, a very prominent integrative medicine physician, the chair of the board of what's called the Institute for Functional Medicine. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But Dr. Hyman talks about the bugs in your gut being like a rainforest, or I suppose, as like an integrated farm, a diverse and interdependent ecosystem, and those bugs must be in balance for you to be healthy. So let me end there and kick it over to our next presenter, Christine McCullum-Gomez.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here this afternoon in our engaging and innovative webinar on soil health. And what I would like to discuss with everyone today are innovative farmer-scientist partnerships for building soil health. However, before I do, I'd like to back up a bit and talk about how soil health fits within a broader framework of sustainability. As you will see in this slide, sustainability has three different dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. And the title of this slide is listed at the bottom: Sustainability Indicators for Measuring Farm Systems Performance. This is actually something that was taken from Dr. John Reganold, who is a soil scientist and agroecologist at Washington State University. And what this webinar will be focusing on today is soil quality and soil health, but also the broader connections to other interrelated dimensions of sustainability. Soil quality, one of these environmental sustainability indicators, is the foundation for all agriculture and natural plant communities, as well as a primary indicator of sustainable land management. According to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the ability of a system to be sustainability is the ability of a system to be maintained over the long term. Dr. Reganold argues that what we really need is an integrated approach when conducting farming systems research. And when we measure sustainability indicators, he believes that we should be involving non-academic partners to the extent possible, including farmers. So in addition to organic farming systems, other innovative systems that make up a modest but growing component of U.S. and global agriculture, these include alternative livestock production systems, mixed crop livestock systems, conservation agriculture, integrated farming, agroforestry, and perennial grains. And what's really important is that these innovative systems are needed for fostering soil health and building sustainability. And what we really need to be doing is building sustainability by mimicking nature. And you may say, well, what does that entail? Well, according to Dr. Rick Haney, who is a soil scientist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service in Temple, Texas, he lists the following elements of an approach based on mimicking nature. First, it grows a skin for living systems. Second, it cycles nutrients. Third, it is diverse, no monoculture. That means not growing large amounts of the same crop year after year. Think of corn. It seeks balance. And finally, it is cost effective. And what he argues is that no one was paying to fertilize the prairie for the buffalo. And so in contrast, how are we doing it by and large? Well, unfortunately, there has been an increase in the use of off-farm inputs such as synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides, and insecticides. Water is being wasted. This strips off the soil's surface. It destroys organic matter and increases erosion. In contrast, what we really need to be doing is working with the system instead of against it. And Dr. Haney argues that we should be mimicking nature because it has been doing research and development much longer than we have. It also fills niches, creates balance, recycles nutrients, conserves water, and it is tenacious. So what can we do? to better mimic nature. First, he argues that we need to put the skin back on the soil using no-till and mixed species cover crops, which will decrease erosion and off-farm inputs. We also need to be innovative and tenacious. And what I would like to do now is turn your attention to farmer Gabe Brown as an example of an innovative farmer who is basically combining traditional agrarian practices with innovative science-based sustainable farming techniques on his 5,400 acre diversified family ranch in Bismarck, North Dakota. Gabe Brown is the National Resources Defense Council 2012 Growing Green Award winner in the food producer category. He has not used synthetic pesticides, insecticides, or fertilizers on his ranch for nearly 15 years. He uses minimal herbicide, which he is striving to eliminate. He does not use GMOs or glyphosate, also known as Roundup. For Gabe, healthy soil is a renewable resource that sustains all. He says that the focus on soil health rather than off-farm inputs has dramatically lowered his beef and grain enterprise costs and improved his profits. By making use of 100% zero-till cropping systems, high-density grazing, as well as polyculture cover crop and cash crop rotations, he has successfully transformed conventional grazing and cropping operations into models of truly regenerative agriculture. His ranch also integrates its cow-calf and grass-finished livestock operations with a highly diverse cropping rotation, which includes over 25 different cash and cover crops. This results in both high yields and strong net profits. I should also note that he does not use antibiotics in raising his livestock, and this work has made him a leader in regenerative ranch management. Okay, so what are some of the keys to achieving healthy soil based on the work of farmer Gabe Brown? He says the least amount of mechanical disturbances possible is needed. We want to armor the soil surface, provide plant diversity, living roots as long as possible, integration of livestock on cropland. Here is a slide that illustrates soil armor. It's another technique for improving soil health by keeping the ground covered at all times. This is achieved through living cover crops and crop residues. This provides an armor that is necessary to protect the soil from both wind and water erosion. And you can see on the next slide here that the use of cover crops has a wide range of benefits. In addition to providing crop diversity, it also helps improve the water cycle, builds soil organic matter, cycles nutrients, enhances pollinators, provides wildlife winter food and shelter, and livestock integration. This is just another example of cover crops provided by Dr. Rick Haney, who is working with farmer Gabe Brown to demonstrate improved soil health on farmer Gabe Brown's farm. This slide here is an example of a cover crop from Gabe Brown's farm, Phacelia, which is a cover crop and a bee-friendly plant that is used to attract bees as well as other friendly insects. I have to also quickly make reference to some breaking news from the BBC. There is a new report that is scheduled to be released next month by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. This is a task force has been convened by this group to look at the effect of neonicotinoid pesticides on beneficial organisms. And what the group or the task force did is it reviewed over 800 peer-reviewed papers that have been published in the last 20 years. And in their report, which again will be published next month, they found that these pesticides, as well as another chemical, are contaminating the soil, water, and air. In addition to the decline of bees, they also found that they also accumulate in soils and pose a significant problem for earthworms, freshwater snails, butterflies, and birds. And the overuse of these pesticides are being compared to the overuse of DDT many years ago. One scientist who is a part of the task force is particularly concerned about the prophylactic use of the neonicotinoid pesticides coated on seeds. And this is with the chemical grows up with the plant so that it is inside and has the ability to destroy pests already built within. However, one scientist involved with this group basically compares this approach to taking antibiotics to avoid getting ill. Ill-advised indeed. The next slide focuses on lady beetles, another beneficial insect, and Gabe Brown notes that for every one insect pest, there are about 1,700 beneficial insects that help bring balance on the farm. This slide just depicts a diverse primer that's ready to graze on the Brown Ranch. He utilizes holistic management when grazing livestock, realizing that livestock are merely a tool for achieving their greater goal of their ranching operation. Within holistic management, an emphasis is put on animal impact and getting residue in contact with the soil surface. And this is important because there are about 1 billion mouths to feed below the soil surface, and we need to feed them. This can be done easily by having a diverse plant community that supplies them with food via root exodus, as well as having the cattle put residue on the soil surface, which provides benefits to the health of the ecosystem. This is just an example of the diversity of the cover crops utilized on Gabe Brown's farm or ranch. And then next, I'd just like to present a slide that really presents the bottom line, and that is that this diversity drives soil health. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about building soil health, how do we measure it? How do we assess it? Well, Dr. Rick Haney has developed an innovative soil health tool, and this tool relies on information that is gleaned from newly developed soil testing methods geared towards soil microbial activity and the readily available substrate that they act upon. In other words, he assesses the soil as a doctor might assess a living being using many measurements of health used collectively to attain an overall picture of soil vigor. The end result is a soil health score, which represents the overall health of the soil system. It combines 5 independent measurements of a soil's biological properties. Dr. Haney notes that between 2000 and 2011, there were at least 17 peer-reviewed journal articles by Haney and others to support the science behind these soil analyses tests. And so if you are interested in this soil health test or learning more about it, as well as the work that he is doing with Gabe Brown to measure improved performance in soil health on Gabe Brown's ranch, I provide the contact information, and I would suggest that you contact him directly. Okay, so now that we have a deeper understanding about the importance of soil health to farm productivity and overall sustainability, I'd like to turn our attention a little bit to the connection between soil quality and food quality. I should note that this is really a new area of study. Dr. John Reginault is one of the pioneers in this area. And again, as I noted earlier, he really argues for the need for an integrated research approach when studying such subject matter. He notes that the use of both interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches are needed. Dr. Reginault and colleagues published one study in PLS1 back in 2010. And what they did is that they evaluated 3 varieties of strawberries for mineral element, shelf life, phytochemical composition, and other properties. However, they also analyzed traditional soil properties in soil DNA using microarray technology. The researchers found that the organic farms had strawberries with longer shelf life, greater dry matter, higher antioxidant activity, and concentrations of ascorbic acid and phenolic compounds, but also lower concentrations of phosphorus and potassium. However, even more interestingly to me is that they found that the organically farmed soils had more total carbon and nitrogen, greater microbial biomass and activity, and higher concentrations of micronutrients. So really looking at the connection, the possible connection between quality of the soil and food quality. The scientists concluded that organic strawberry farms produced higher quality fruit, and their higher quality soils may have greater microbial function capability and resilience to stress. Of course, they also further advised that additional investigations are needed to detect and quantify such effects and their interactions. So in addition to the importance of soil health for healthy plants, we also need to remember that we need healthy animals for healthy food and healthy people. And Dr. Wallinga will be addressing this in more detail, but before I end, what I would like to do is just leave you with some additional resources. First, here we have some web-based resources from Gabe Brown's Ranch, also information for Dr. Rick Haney and Dr. Christine Nichols, who are working in tandem with Gabe Brown. And then finally, some print-based resources, which I have made reference to here today, both directly and indirectly. I'd be more than happy to take questions at the end, and so at this time, I will turn the presentation back over to Dr. Wallinga.
Okay, sorry about that. I had to unmute myself. Well, thanks, Christine. Let me just build on that a little bit by talking about the bacterial ecosystem in humans, and in particular in the human gut. It's fascinating, but in the last, I don't know, I would say 5 or 6 years, this topic of the human microbiome has just exploded. It's, you know, almost without fail, when you talk to people about one of the most exciting areas in research, this is what comes up. And basically, it's an evolving picture, much like some of the things that Christine talked about. Um, in terms of human health, it's really an evolving picture. But what's becoming clear is the incredible complexity of this system, and it is a system, uh, and that these bacteria have many, many impacts on our health, and many functions that were previously underappreciated. So for example, the microbiota in our gut help us to harvest the energy from our food by breaking down complex molecules. They build vitamins that we can't manufacture. They serve as an integral part of our immune system. The gut, in fact, is the biggest immune system in our immune organ in our body. So I'm going to talk about some of the implications of this uh, for us. Um, so as I said, it's kind of an incomplete picture right now. We know quite a lot about from the science associating food and health, namely through diet, and we know quite a bit about associations between food and microbes on the food, including resistant microbes. And then we know a bunch about associations between microbes and health. What we don't have is sort of a very comprehensive view of how all these things interact. We're still teasing out the details. Um, to some people in medicine, this is sort of confirmation of something that they've been saying for over 20 years. And many of you may not be aware of a subdiscipline in medicine called functional medicine. And it really arose out of sort of a frustration, I think, with the oversights of a more conventional medical model, which by history has really been reacting to acute injury and acute infections and less to chronic disease. And that conventional approach has gotten less and less relevant the more chronic diseases like obesity, like asthma, like heart disease, diabetes have come to dominate our health system. And so functional medicine, was a way of looking at health and disease that's much more systems based, and really the influence of the gut microbiome on human health is an integral part of how people in this functional medicine discipline practice and how they look at health and disease. So I thought it was important to mention that. Just some differences then between kind of a functional medicine approach and a conventional medicine approach is that functional medicine, instead of responding to acute injury, kind of looks at root causes of chronic disease. It is a systems approach. It doesn't treat people as all the same. It really um, looks not only at the microbiome as being unique in individuals, but also the way it intersects with their genome as being unique. And then it, to a much greater extent, aims for health and wellness rather than just responding to acute sickness. Um, so with that context, I want to touch on some recent studies, and I think they're going to raise more questions than answers, but they are very intriguing. One, this study, for example, in Nature, which is uh, the most influential scientific journal, this is from December, and it showed not only the importance of the microbiome in the human gut, but how quickly it can change. And what they found, based on research in people, was that in just 3 to 4 days, based on shifts in the diet, you can get incredible shifts in the microbiome. And this is just kind of a sea change from what was thought previously. Um, One of the prominent infectious disease doctors dealing with issues of the microbiome has been Martin Blaser. He's a past president of the Infectious Disease Society of America, and he's worth bringing up because of a very new book called Missing Microbes: How Overuse of Antibiotics is Fueling Our Modern Plagues. And he really lays out the argument for changing completely the way that we think about microbes, disease, and antibiotics. And so rather than what has to date been sort of the dominant metaphor, namely that that bacteria are sort of a plague and we have to get rid of them, and you hear a lot of war metaphors like that we're in a battle against superbugs, we have to eliminate them. Blaser argues for changing that completely because it causes us to overlook all these beneficial functions of a healthy microbiome. Uh, and our and as a result, our overuse of antibiotics has distorted that healthy microbiome, and in the process, he says, contributed to things like asthma, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac, stomach cancer, and especially obesity. And I'll just show you a picture from a study by one of his lab colleagues, Il-Yang Cho. And this again is a pretty recent study. And Cho did something interesting. He took very young mice and exposed their mammal systems to antibiotics, either penicillin or vancomycin or both together or tetracycline, all at levels at which these things are approved for use in agriculture. So many of you probably know that 80% by volume of all the antibiotics we sell in the country are sold for use in agriculture, and most of those end up in animal feed, including tetracycline and penicillin and tetracycline are very prominent. But in any case, what Cho did then after 7 weeks was to look at these mice, and he found that the mice who were exposed to these antibiotics weren't necessarily heavier by weight, but they were much fatter. Uh, um, they had much more body fat. And you can see that the fat is the fat colored tissue in the pictures here, and you can see how it's much thicker on the mouse exposed while young to antibiotics than it is to the other mice. And um, he did something even more interesting. He looked at genes in these mice, and the antibiotic exposed mice had more than 400 additional activated genes. So not only the gut flora in the mice were different, but the activation of the genes, what the what the cells in the mice actually did was quite different. And so there appears to be a way in which the antibiotic exposure is changing the metabolism of these mice that then has an impact on, among other things, their fat levels. Um, Now, the link to antibiotic resistance, which is the other epidemic I highlighted earlier, is also coming to the fore. So here you see two recent things, a report on what they're calling not just the environmental microbiome, but the resistome. In other words, the collection of antibiotics or the collection of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics in the broad environment. And this is being highlighted pretty prominently by the Centers for Disease Control, for example, and linked back to agriculture and the use of antibiotics routinely in animal agriculture in particular. And then finally, I want to just point to another very interesting study talking about the transfer of genes across this whole ecosystem. So if we think of the big bacterial ecosystem as one that encompasses farms and people, we know that bacteria travel between those places. And bacteria are very promiscuous in terms of their genetic material. But what this study found was that the bacteria in humans exchange their genes much more than bacteria in other places, and that proximity counts more than relatedness. In other words, it matters less how similar different kinds of bacteria are to each other than it does to just the fact that they occupy the same environment. And so you see much more transfer, 25-fold more transfer of genes, including resistance genes, in humans than in non-human bacteria. And so environment trumps relatedness, and this could be really important in terms of tracking disease-causing bacteria, uh, including antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So let me just stop there and kick it to our third presenter to kind of bring us back to some broader issues having to deal with policy. And again, lodge your questions for all of our speakers.
Good morning or good afternoon. This is Bill Wenzel. I'm the Agriculture Program Director for the Izaak Walton League, and it's really a pleasure to be with you to have this discussion this morning or afternoon, depending where you are in the country. I thought I'd start out by giving you a little bit more information on the Izaak Walton League. We're probably the oldest or one of the oldest conservation groups in the country. We were founded in 1922. We have more than 45,000 members in our organization dedicated to the restoration, conservation, and promotion of our natural resources. My role in the agriculture program is to promote those interests in the context of farm and food policy, and that's often represented in the Farm Bill. One of the things that I'm really excited about by this conversation is that I've been working for the better half of 30 years on putting together kind of conservation, farm, food policy, and I think this is really a unique occasion. For one of the first times, we're actually bringing the public health community into discuss, issues involving conservation. And my experience in the past has been that we tend to, when we talk about the issues that David and Chris were talking about earlier, we tend to link those more with food-related issues than we do with conservation. And this is really an opportunity for us to come together and link conservation with food and with public health. And I'm really excited about the potentials here, because I think it really changes the political dynamic and our ability to make some really substantial changes in how we look at farm and food policy. I'm just going to back up a little bit and talk about how NRCS really started out this discussion. This is a soil health, and the soil health initiative is something that's rather new in NRCS. It started a few years back when the Obama administration basically sent directives out to all of the agencies and said, we want you to figure out how you can better respond to the changes that are going on in the context of climate. And what USDA came up with was that healthy soils are probably the primary way that we can attack the climate change problems that are going to face agriculture in the future. The healthy soils help to maintain water in the soil, and they also help to improve water quality. And as Chris pointed out earlier in her presentation, there are a lot of other environmental benefits that go along with that. As a result, NRCS basically dedicated this program to keeping soil healthy and productive, and it was of paramount importance, and really views this as being one of the most critical conservation endeavors of our time. This program is really still in development, and I think that's what is also important here, that, as Chris and as Dr. Wallinga and others are beginning to engage in this discussion on healthy soils and its importance, we have an ability to utilize this program to really craft farm and food policy going into the future. The soil health, we haven't talked much about the benefit to the farmer, but there are benefits in that it reduces costs substantially, since they're not going up and down the fields doing tillage, decreases the need for fertilizer and pesticide use, and there's increasing evidence that it also increases yields. Talked a little bit about the environmental benefits associated with all of that, but as I pointed out initially, and I don't want to take up a lot of time with a lot of commentary, but I really do think this provides a tremendous opportunity for us to work together on defining farm and food policy. This will be one of the first times in my experience that we have the capacity to bring people together from the public health community, the food community, local foods, organic and conventional production agriculture, to work on an issue together, which I think is ultimately going to change the way agriculture looks in this country. I think I'll probably stop it there. I am providing my contact information, and feel free to call me anytime you'd like, or send me an email. we also post regularly to our Facebook and our website, and both of those are listed here. So rather than go on any longer, I think I will just stop there and open it up to any questions from the folks in the audience.
So this is David. I hope you all continue to pose questions, and thank you, Bill, and thank you, Christine. Jennifer, unfortunately, I can't see the questions for whatever reason, so I'm going to call on you to jump in and pose the questions to the panelists. And panelists, let's keep our answers short so we can get through as many questions as possible.
Thanks, David. I'll fix that problem after I ask the first question here. So let's see. Here's a question. Maybe this is for you, Christine. The question is, can you address Farmer Brown's statement, living roots as long as possible? And what are the beneficial mechanisms of action in the living root? And Bill, you might have some comment on that as well.
Yeah, living roots it's a complex discussion. I really do think it's probably beyond the scope of this webinar. However, for anyone who is interested in further enlightenment and knowledge, I would recommend Dr. Christine Nichols, Nichols. She is a soil microbiologist with USDA ARS. I believe she was listed under my additional resource slide. She has been working in tandem with Gabe Brown, and again, it's a part of that integrated research approach that Dr. Reganold, who is a soil scientist and agroecologist out of Washington State, recommends. I do think that that is probably a bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but I will leave you with Dr. Christine Nichols as a future resource to follow up on, and then I will turn it over to Bill for any additional comments he may have.
The only other comment that I would have is that this is a top priority for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they've done a pretty good job of both collecting stories and providing information and fact sheets on issues that are very similar to the one that was raised. And my only suggestion would be that if folks are looking to answers to some of these questions, you could go to the USDA webpage, NRCS, and go to soil health, and there are some very detailed discussions and fact sheets that should provide you with some of the information that you're looking for.
So let me jump in with the next question, and let me say first, because this has come up from the audience, we won't have the ability to see slides after the fact, but we will have a broadcast of the webinar just without the slide component. You'll hear the audio. Is that correct, Jennifer? I believe so.
Actually,
so
David.
Let me
David?
Question from Kim Purvis. Oh.
Sorry.
Yes.
The recording actually will include both the audio and the PowerPoint slides.
Oh, good, good. Okay. And that probably will take a little bit to be put up. So just return to the registration site, and you'll be able to get that after the fact. So the next question is from Kim Purvis, and she says, I'm interested in hearing whether the presenters have noticed changes in the presence of pesticides, antibiotics, and other chemicals in the water supply with different farming approaches. I can take that.
Chris, I would probably, again, recommend the U.S. Geological Survey. I believe they have been tracking that issue, looking at accumulation of pesticides, not only in the water, but in the air. So U.S. Geological Survey would be a resource for anyone interested in that topic that I could provide.
I could just say generally, like if a producer is using sort of a systems or agroecological approach, uh, then they're not going to put on inputs uh, sort of preemptively. It's going to be part of a system and only as a last resort because that approach dictates people trying to address problems or prevent problems upstream without adding inputs like antibiotics or pesticides. So I would think that by definition, they would tend to use fewer chemical agents and therefore there would be less in water. That would just seem commonsensical to me.
Yeah, and I think, just to add in a little bit on that is I think one of the high priorities for the USDA is to better assess how, some of these new approaches that are being taken, and there are a lot of programs in the conservation title. They are really doing a lot of work in trying to better assess what practices work, what practices don't work, and we'll be able to better gauge the effectiveness of some of these practices somewhere down the road, because I really do think there's a dedication in the agency to make sure that we can measure the results of putting some of these practices on board. I think I would also put in at this point, and it follows up on what David just said, is that what we're really talking about in terms of soil health is more of a systems approach to agriculture, and it's one that not just it encompasses organic and local food production, but production agriculture itself. And I think one of the really interesting things about this soil health initiative is that it is going to provide some momentum if we can get behind it and show some results to move to more of a systems approach to the way we look at our conservation programming in agriculture. And from that perspective, I really see a lot of future in what's happening here with this program. I think what will happen is that as we move into some of more of the policy discussions, this is a standalone program right now. We'd like to see it incorporated into some of the programs that farmers receive benefits for by adopting conservation practices, and I'm hopeful that what will happen as a result, and from the public health community becoming engaged, is that we will have more voices that will be out there arguing for more money in conservation programs and more focus on a systems approach that the health initiative, the soil health initiative, really envisions.
Thanks. Let's see, I'm just scanning through those a little bit. This is from Susan Bird. Switching agricultural systems from a conventional to a more conservation-based system poses challenges for farmers. The learning curve is often accompanied by financial losses in the short term. Are there any incentives in place to help farmers now with this transition?
I think that there are, through the conservation stewardship program, there are some opportunities. I think increasingly what we are arguing is that the soil health initiative and the work that farmers are doing to forward this program need to be incorporated into our conservation programming. That hasn't happened yet, but I believe that there are some avenues currently existing that will assist farmers in moving toward this approach, and I think there's probably a good chance that with the advocacy of groups like ours and the folks around the table, will be able to, increase the pot of money available to farmers that can pursue those goals. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that over the last 6 years, conservation programs have taken the majority of the hits when Congress decided that they were going to cut programs. Nearly 80% of the cuts to all Farm Bill programs over the course of that period occurred in the conservation title. And what we really need is a stronger body of folks and an audience that are prepared to stand up and say, we really need programs like the Soil Health Initiative and a number of the other programs in the conservation title in order to help farmers move from that purely production focus to more of a conservation-based systems approach. So,
Yep.
My view is that this webinar goes a long way in helping us bring together the people that can actually make that happen.
Christine, Megan Innes asks, whenever I try to talk about sustainable farming, soil health, I get this impression that it's not being received well. How can we communicate to the public that soil needs to be cared for in order to maintain the health of the community? And I'm putting words in her mouth, but basically, and have it be heard.
Well, I think part of the issue is a problem with our culture. Sometimes when you have an abundance of food that's readily available, you may have 3 grocery stores within 2 miles of where you live. You may take where your food comes from for granted. One of the things I think holds hope is teaching our children where their food comes from. I saw a recent survey once that indicated that a group of children thought that milk came from a plant. And, this isn't necessarily about soil per se, but I think the bigger picture is that if we can educate the next generation, our children, about the importance of healthy soil for not only their well-being, but for the well-being of their children and their children's children. And, we can utilize social media. We know that the younger generations are really adept in using it. And so I think, first of all, programs that can help connect children to where their food comes from, whether it's through a gardening education or curriculum or part of a farm to school program, and then utilizing information through social media to help educate the public. Obviously, we don't have a multi-million-dollar budget that some of people who are not necessarily as concerned with soil health do, but I think if we collectively look at educating our youth and then engage them in the conversation, they can help spread the word and mobilize people and communities to try to educate the masses.
Thanks. Marcel Harris. Go ahead.
Well, and I also think that one of the things that we're learning as we go down the road with soil health is that there's economic benefit to farmers. So we don't have to merely talk about the environmental benefits. There are studies that would indicate that yields increase by 10% by putting cover crops on the fields, just because of the value it provides in increasing nitrogen, et cetera, and assisting in crop production. And I think farmers are increasingly looking at some of these issues, particularly in the context of soil health, in the realm of economic benefit. So there's definitely another way of talking about this that does not necessarily look like we're just purely promoting the environmental benefits that go along with some of these practices. There are some, pocketbook issues that are very important to farmers that I think are part of this equation.
Right. I'm going to pony one up for me. Eric Derrier asked, any benefit of using the term agroecology in making changes at the policy and public health level as it relates to farms? This kind of goes back to how do we talk about soil health in a way that resonates. I'm a huge fan of an agroecology approach to describe a lot of the science coming out of systems biology and evolutionary biology. However, I don't think it has a lot of resonance among people outside of agriculture or ecology. So I think it's audience dependent. And the challenge here for my group, Healthy Food Action, is how do we meet people in health where they're at, because they don't use terms like agroecology. They use terms like microbiome or gut flora. So I think, and this is what I tried to do in my talk, is draw parallels between the gut flora of the animals and the gut flora of people, between the microbiome in the human and the microbiome on the farm. And I think doing that, trying to use the same language and point out that they're both related systems, is maybe the way to get some traction there.
And David, this is Chris. I would also chime in here, and I would recommend that maybe changes need to be made in curriculums. Perhaps ecology should be a required course for both nutrition and public health students. It is a science, and that would help people make those bigger connections and try to integrate a systems approach. Obviously, ecosystem services are of vital importance for food, air, and water. Yet I would be surprised if only more than a handful of people in maybe the public health arena really understand, first of all, what ecosystem services are, or quote, nature services, and the value they serve to healthy air, healthy water, and ultimately healthy food, healthy soil as well.
I think that's right. And just make a little plug here. Colleagues at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health are soon, I think, coming out with the first textbook on food systems and public health. So that'll go a long way, I think, to bringing that systems approach into curricula. We're going a few minutes late, but we got a little bit of a late start. So let me just look a little bit more. Here's a question from Melinda Himmelgarn, who many of you may know. Melinda asks about manure spreading and the impact of that on soil, plants, and sort of ecosystem health. And I've got some thoughts on that, but do others want to take that on as well?
Well, it's a rather broad issue. Clearly manures, assist in providing nitrogen sources for crop production. The question is whether or not they're done appropriately in terms of the amount of acreage there is available, and generally putting manure out on the ground is a way to really increase soil health. I think most of the folks that are researching and writing on this would argue that composting is probably a better way to look at this. There's more long-term benefit, but clearly manure is a way to reduce chemical fertilizer use and if it's done well with, well within rates per acre, it's a very valuable source of nutrients.
I think that the other point though, Bill, is from the microbiome standpoint or from the sort of soil, what am I saying here? Well, from the research that I presented, the cautionary note there is that we now know when you bring a lot of bacteria in proximity to one another, which is what happens when we have manure lagoons or collecting huge amounts of manure in one place, uh, it makes it very easy for resistance genes to spread both between bacteria and then into the food supply or into the water supply to people. And given the scale of livestock production in the country and the concentration of manure, not manure per se, because you're right, it is a potential nutrient source, but when it's concentrated, it just enhances that ability of resistance genes or bacteria to move quickly into the human environment. So I think,
I
yeah,
I would totally agree with that.
great. Well, we're at 5 minutes after the hour, and we've covered quite a few of the talks. I think it's probably time to wrap up. Let me just finish up by asking the presenters whether they want to make any final points.
I think the only final point that I would make, and it's the one I started out with, is that this is an opportunity for us to really bring together a wide variety of voices around issues involving conservation and production agriculture. Typically, in the 30 years I've been working on these issues, that when we start talking about a lot of the health issues, folks automatically go to food, and we talk about organics and local food systems, which is all great. But this opens up a new vista for us to work together and have an impact on production agriculture that we have not had up to this point in time. So I'm hoping this is the beginning of a new discussion and a broader alliance around a vast array of conservation programs and farm and food policy.
This is Chris. I would just like to chime in, and I would say that we vote with our fork and or our spoon and knives. And so I would say that if where your food comes from is important to you, you could become more actively involved with groups like the American Farmland Trust, which is very concerned with how development negatively impacts farmland and the importance of farmland protection. We can't eat from land that has been paved over and turned into a shopping mall. The second point I would like to add is that you could also contact your representatives directly, let them know that these issues are important to you. For example, how many people who are in the nutrition and public health arenas understand that pollinators are crucial to some of the most healthful foods that we consume? You can contact your politicians and tell them that you want them to sponsor the Saving America's Pollinator Act, or HR 2692. We can make a difference if we use our voices collectively, and so with technology, that even makes doing that all the more easier these days.
Right, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say if you're a health professional, you can also get involved through Healthy Food Action, which is what our purpose is to help you find those opportunities. So thank you for your patience, audience members, and thanks presenters for your contributions as well. On behalf of Healthy Food Action and Izaak Walton League with NSAC, the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, we thank you and hope you found this informative. Again, if you want to review the slides and the rebroadcast, stay tuned at these sites, and we'll direct you to those when we post them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.